Greetings, boils and ghouls. I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and welcome to another entry of Crypt Tuesdays, where I provide retrospectives and reviews of HBO's classic Tales from the Crypt episodes and the comics that inspired them. The last one of these vids was 3 years ago. Super sorry about that.
I just don't take no for an answer.
In today's video, I'm covering Season 2, Episode 1 of Tales from the Crypt, Dead Right, the 7th episode total and released on April 21st, 1990. Starring Elizabeth Sparkle herself, Demi Moore, along with a sort of unrecognizable Jeffrey Tambor.
I'll have a Rob Roy.
At 18 episodes, Season 2 of Tales from the Crypt had triple the episode order of Season 1, also marking the series as an early hit for HBO that attracted bigger stars going forward.
Want to keep that 90-pound corpse for the rest of your death?
Before I get to the episode itself, though, let's chat a bit about the EC comic story that inspired it.
Are you Madame Vorna? Well, I heard you could tell the future.
Dead Right first appeared in December 1953 in issue 6 of EC Comics' shock suspense stories, which offered a mix of stories in the horror, crime, and sci-fi genres, all with the shocking endings expected of EC comic stories. Dead Right is no different. Written by Wally Wood and drawn by Jack Kamen, it tells the story of Kathy, a working woman with ambitions to marry her way up in the world, and during her lunch break, Kathy seeks guidance from a fortune teller named Madame Vorna, just to pass the time, and pass the time she does as Kathy ends up late returning to work and losing her job in the process, just as the psychic seemingly predicted. Kathy realizes right away that the fortune teller's clock is a half hour slow, so it seems like the psychic just sabotaged Kathy. But the psychic successfully predicts Kathy will get a new job that day, and this is enough to convince Kathy that Madame Vorna is the real deal. And when Vorna reveals that Kathy will gain an immense fortune if she marries a fat slob simping over Kathy, Kathy hesitantly goes along with this scheme. What's the immense fortune, you might be asking? $25,000. That was worth about $300,000 in today's money, which is a lot of money, but not that much to go into marrying some fat fuck who's currently poor just out of blind faith. That's the interesting twist to this comic's otherwise familiar story. We've all seen gold digger stories play out in fiction, and especially the real world, where a young, attractive woman transparently marries usually an old dude who's just around the corner from death's door, with the chick hoping to inherit all the old dude's cash when he finally croaks. But Charlie Marno, the ugly oaf that Kathy dates and quickly marries, isn't rich at all. Kathy's promised by some fortune teller that she'll become rich in some vague way if Kathy marries Charlie, and that the dude will eventually die, so Kathy sticks it out making assumptions that a rich relative of Charlie's will croak and that Charlie will follow not soon after. It's a funny concept because a lot of women buy into this fortune-telling horse shit. Watching a woman put herself through hell being with somebody they don't like out of vague promises based on tea leaves is some good satire. Kathy ends up becoming wealthy, but not in the way she expected. Kathy is, of all things, the millionth customer at a cafeteria and is awarded $25,000. I don't know what kind of cafeteria has the cash to spill on this kind of publicity stunt, but it's a convenient plot device that motivates Kathy to leave Charlie now that she's got some serious cafeteria money. She doesn't need Charlie anymore, and he doesn't take that so well, killing his beloved Kathy. Madame Vorna ends up technically correct that Charlie would inherit some money, Kathy's money after murdering her, and Vorna was also right that Charlie would die. Vorna just also conveniently failed to mention his death would be by electric chair immediately after killing Kathy. I'm not totally sure you can inherit money from somebody you're convicted of killing, but whatever. Dead Right is a solid example of an EC Comics crime story with a slight dash of horror and an ending where somebody gets their comeuppance, ripe fodder for a Tales from the Crypt TV adaptation. Before I get to the episode, I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, me. Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here's the movie I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested in my bonus streams, and I thank you in advance.
Well, I don't believe in this stuff, but I thought if it didn't go over my lunch hour, what the hell?
Yes, darling, what the hell?
The episode Dead Right is an extremely faithful adaptation of the comic it shares its title with. The only differences between the two are minor or additions to make the episode longer than its 8-page inspiration. The episode even takes place in the 1950s. Demi Moore plays Kathy Finch, a secretary who loses her job after having her time wasted by a fortune teller named Madame Vorna, who in this version has a dog named Trotsky. Aww.
She heard correctly, didn't she, Trotsky?
Vorna ends up back in Kathy's good graces by successfully predicting Kathy would be gainfully employed again the same day.
It was because of your stupid clock. It's slow.
But you weren't unemployed for long, were you, darling?
It's just in this version, Kathy is a waitress at a strip club. It was HBO in its early days. They had to get the TNA somewhere. Demi Moore was possibly supposed to play a stripper in this episode, but she probably turned that idea down. She was waiting for the right movie to come along before accepting that role. Now, in the original comic, Madame Vorna seems to be more of a fraud, making things up as she goes along. She reads tea leaves as a conduit with the spirit world, but it really seems like that John Edward thing where a psychic will read somebody's reactions, stalling for time until they tell the person what they want to hear. In the comic, it feels kind of ambiguous whether Vorna was a psychic or if her predictions were just a tragic coincidence that led Kathy down a bad path. Vorna being a psychic didn't matter that much. It was more that you shouldn't put blind faith in any one person to decide the direction of your life, even if they might be psychic.
So what do you use? Tarot cards?
I have what people call the second sight.
That idea is still in effect in the episode, but Madame Vorna is treated as a real psychic. She doesn't read tea leaves, she makes her predictions on the spot without hesitation.
Soon after you are married, your man will inherit money. After he inherits the money, he will die.
So it can kind of make the episode feel more, in some abstract way, like an evil genie story.
I mean, I'm gonna be a widow. A rich widow.
Kathy is making a wish, and Madame Vorna tells Kathy what she needs to do to get what she wants.
I told you, shortly after you're married, he will die. A violent death. I told you that.
But like in any evil genie story, you have to be careful what you wish for, because it might not be quite what you wanted.
He will inherit the money, and then he will die. Vorna is right.
Like in the comic, Kathy is pushed into marrying an ugly, fat fuck named Charlie Marno, played by Jeffrey Tambor, a regular at the strip club who has the hots for Kathy. And the Colin Farrell penguin looks exactly like this character. Like, this had to have been Matt Reeves' inspiration, right? Am I fucking crazy here? Admittedly, with Jeffrey Tambor, you don't need as much makeup like with Colin Farrell, but believe it or not, Jeffrey Tambor wore a fat suit for this episode. The Charlie Marno in the comic is fat and ugly, but the episode heightens this a bit more, making him much more monstrously ugly. Balder, fatter, dumber, dirtier, lazier, and usually under scary lighting. I guess you could maybe interpret it more as us seeing this guy through Kathy's eyes. Charlie isn't an actual monster, though, until the last act. He's just a woman's worst nightmare to be in a relationship with.
I love married life.
It's rich, isn't it?
Kathy can't even kiss Charlie without immediately vomiting. But it's hard to feel sorry for Kathy, since this is what she chose for herself. Tambor doesn't really have to do much acting to play a creep. This is one of those jobs where the makeup does a lot of the acting for you. He just needs to look hideous. Admittedly, the episode could have made us sympathize with Charlie more by making him less of a caricature and giving him a good personality, but even if he's being used by Kathy in some cosmic way, Charlie doesn't have any redeeming qualities going for him for us to want to root for him instead of Kathy. Not to say Demi Moore's Kathy has many redeeming qualities either when she's imagining ways Charlie will die having lunch with her friend Sally, the chick from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
Go for it, Cat.
But Kathy in the episode is less of a bitch than in the comic. Kathy feels more toughened up and cynical working in a man's world. It feels like Kathy just doesn't believe in love, and the only condition where she'd actually get married is for money.
You're not gonna marry any jerk unless he's loaded already.
She's just being real, and if there's no money in a relationship, she's fine struggling on her own.
You love money, don't you, Kathy?
Kathy just gets too caught up in greed, which is her undoing. Surprisingly, like in the comic, Kathy ends up falling into money, but instead of being the millionth customer at a cafeteria, she's the millionth customer of an automat, which is like a cafeteria, but the food is dispensed from a vending machine.
With a check for $1 million.
Imagine putting a quarter in a Pepsi machine and a guy walks up to you and gives you $1 million. The crazier thing is this episode takes place in 1950, so adjusted for inflation, Kathy got $13 million in this version of the story. I feel like that amount of money would make an automat chain go out of business, but whatever, it's a plot device.
It's a thrill to be rich.
Kathy's fate is the same as in the comic, but she goes out of her way more to gloat in this version and spend a whole day shopping.
I'm out of here. Thanks for 3 months of nausea.
No.
The real lesson here, ladies, if you're suddenly a millionaire, don't go to your future ex's place to rub it in. You're just inviting a stabbing. If this was a few years later, Charlie's knife would just be stabbing silicone.
If I can't have you, nobody can!
For his murder, Charlie ends up in the electric chair, like in the comic, and they feel the need to point out his last meal was the biggest ever seen.
And Charlie has eaten his last meal, which we understand is the largest any death row prisoner has ever had.
Okay, we get it. He's fat as shit, dear lord. The episode ends with a woman approaching Madame Vorna for her psychic prowess, and it really does feel like in this version, Vorna deliberately orchestrated the events and is relishing it.
Well, Charlie Marno did inherit a fortune from Kathy Finch after he murdered her.
The Crypt Keeper's host segments in this episode are fairly basic, just him pretending to be a fortune teller. When you wear that sash on your head, you're either a psychic gypsy or a pirate. This was still the early days of the show before the host segments became more elaborate.
When Charlie got his just desserts, he requested seconds.
Dead Right is a solid episode of Tales from the Crypt. It's an extremely faithful adaptation when the show would normally reimagine or modernize the stories they adapted. It's not necessarily the scariest or most memorable of stories, but it's a great example of an EC Comics tale in live action. A tale of greed and manipulation that ends with a jilted lover getting their revenge. I give Tales from the Crypt Season 2, Episode 1, Dead Right, 4 Crypts out of 5. Next time around, I'll be covering The Switch, the Tales from the Crypt episode directed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah, he directed an episode. Get subscribed so you don't miss it. This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of their support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you liked this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more videos. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like private movie night streams with me and credits in my videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. Dr. Wolfula signing out.